Okay, so let me start off by saying I raid progressed in World of Warcraft on the hardest difficulty for years, and it was something that I loved. Seeing new raid encounters, learning new mechanics, seeing the team come together after so much trial and error, and seeing the boss's HP slowly whittling down to 0%. The elation when the boss finally dies. That is such a great feeling. Now, when it comes to Final Fantasy XIV, I had some experience playing it back when A Realm Reborn and Heavensward first came out, but I didn't really commit to the game until Shadowbringers. You know, after Shadowlands had completely demotivated me from playing World of Warcraft anymore. Unfortunately, when I got into Final Fantasy XIV, Shadowbringers had already been out, so I didn't get to experience the expansion fresh, or how raid progression felt. The groups I did get into, for the Extremes and Savages, they were groups that already knew the encounters. As I'm sure you are aware, going through an encounter with a group that already knows what to do is a very different experience than going into an encounter that has yet to be learned. With Endwalker out, I finally got the chance to see what progression is like when all the content is fresh, when everyone is blind and has to learn the fights, what it's like to get the required gear to even get into the harder content. With that, let's compare how Final Fantasy XIV and World of Warcraft do raid progression. The first thing you have to do at the start of an expansion in both games is get to the minimum item level to do, well, you know, the harder content. In World of Warcraft's case, it's to queue up for heroics, to get the gear to queue up for looking for raid. And you also will need gear for anyone to consider inviting you to a party for raiding and mythic pluses. And in Final Fantasy XIV's case, it's the minimum item level to queue up for the extreme trials, the raids, and also some endgame dungeons. I just wanted to start off by saying this is in relation to the start of an expansion. Things will change as the expansion goes on. In World of Warcraft, it can take a very long time to get the gear you need to run the content you want. As an example, to queue up for the heroic dungeons, I remembered running a friend through the normal dungeons for hours to get his item level high enough for the heroics. When the expansion first came out, there was no currency you got that you could exchange for gear, so it was really up to the RNG gods for getting your item level up. In Final Fantasy XIV, by the time I hit level cap, I was already within 5 item levels to being able to queue up for the extreme trials. The game flat out gives you 5 pieces of high item level gear from just doing the MSQ, filling out your left side of the equipment screen, and then it's just a matter of getting some gear for the right side. You know, your rings and necklaces and stuff of that nature. It's pretty quick to run a few dungeons to fill those out. And if you are supremely unlucky with the RNG, you always get the tombstones that you can then exchange to fill in that gear. I've now leveled up 3 jobs to level cap in Final Fantasy XIV, all of which require different gear sets, and they are all at the minimum item level to get into the extremes and normal mode raids. And it really didn't take all that long to get to that item level. Now, obviously RNG can sometimes be fickle, but I feel like in Final Fantasy XIV, they design their systems in such a way that RNG doesn't get too annoying. Now, I mentioned this before, but learning fights in MMORPGs, at least for me, is one of the most enjoyable aspects of the games. I loved progressing in mythic raid encounters for World of Warcraft, seeing the boss's HP slowly decreasing each pull, watching as the raid team got better and better at the mechanics, everyone moving in perfect harmony until it all comes together in that final blaze of glory and the boss goes down. It is a great experience, it's fun, it releases that dopamine and I wind up smiling from ear to ear. I think Final Fantasy XIV does this even better than World of Warcraft. We were doing the second extreme trial for Endwalker, so anyone who's done that knows exactly what I am talking about here. And the first phase was one of the best learning experiences I've ever had in raiding. It blew me away with just how much fun it is learning all those mechanics. And I mean that. All those mechanics. The first phase of this trial has about 10 mechanics you really have to get comfortable with in order to clear that phase. You will die a lot while trying to figure out what to do. Then you get into phase 2, where the fight is almost completely unrecognizable from the normal mode, with many new mechanics added, And you also have to contend with every mechanic you were doing in Phase 1, so it becomes this insanely hectic phase. But at the same time, as you learn it and become more acquainted with what's going on, the chaos of it starts to make sense, and it feels really good when it all comes together. So, there are 3 reasons I feel that progressing in Final Fantasy XIV feels so good. Number 1. Food lasts through death, so you don't feel like you are wasting a bunch of resources trying to beat these fights. Dying isn't nearly as much of a punishment. In World of Warcraft, when you die, your food effect goes with you, and it can become very annoying when you die a lot and have to keep eating that very expensive food. Number 2. Infinite battle reses. You know, when I first heard of this, coming from World of Warcraft, I laughed at it. I thought that would make it way too easy. But here's the thing, I was an idiot. This makes progressing the fights so much less taxing and annoying. The first time we got to Enrage in the Extreme Trial 2, the boss was at like 35% HP. Just think about that. We weren't even close to beating it. The infinite battle reses really help with making progression less annoying and more fun. You get to keep seeing more of the fight and its mechanics. If your group is dying all the time, you will not beat the Enrage. It's as simple as that. Battle resing gives you a minute of 25% less of your main stats, so your DPS is going to be severely dampened. So at the end of the day, your group still needs a solid performance to get the clear. Number 3. When you do wipe, you start right back at the boss and can jump right back in. This helps so much. You don't have to run back. You don't have that downtime. You can just try again. You know, this is one of the reasons Super Meat Boy was such a fun platformer. Despite being brutally hard and unforgiving, when you died, you just spawned right away and could try again. So, I am not going to lie, I had trepidation about using the Party Finder in Final Fantasy XIV. The Party Finder in World of Warcraft, well, it left me dead inside, and I was scared to even give it a shot in Final Fantasy XIV. Here's the thing, in World of Warcraft, my experience with the Party Finder was you would spend hours trying to get into a group for the content you wanted to do, a single wipe later the group would fall apart, and you'd felt like you completely wasted your time and energy. The thing with World of Warcraft is, people tend to leave after a wipe or two. Many groups have the structural integrity of a house of cards. It doesn't take much to bring it down. I've seen so many groups fall apart, and it doesn't take much. And in my own experiences, I've seen plenty of negative and downright mean comments when players messed up. So, in Final Fantasy XIV, I had this idea that you shouldn't be going into Party Finder unless you know the fights very well. I should have known the games would be different here, I mean, they are in so many other regards, but that lingering thought was still deeply embedded. So, I used Duty Finder to try to learn the fights to be ready for Party Finder, and when I told my friend I was doing that, well, he laughed at me and told me to just use Party Finder, and thank God for that. So, I found a party in there relatively quickly for the extreme trial I wanted to do. It was advertised as practice, and we wiped for about an hour straight on the first phase, and everyone was remaining positive the entire time. No one left group. I was in shock. And in all the groups I had joined, until I got my first kill, I had not once seen negativity or people losing their tempers. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm sure players get agitated and lose their cool, and I'm sure if you tried to join a group that was farming an extreme trial with zero experience, they wouldn't be too pleased with you when you died over and over again. But, from my first impressions using Party Finder, well, it was a very pleasant experience. Getting raid gear in World of Warcraft is, well, it's like pulling teeth. It's uncomfortable, it's painful, and you feel like you are being jerked around a lot. That's by design. They want to keep you raiding and playing, and a way that they do that is by making gear take a while. This has not been the case in Final Fantasy XIV. I am specifically talking about Extreme Trials right now, but I'll talk a bit about the Pandemonium raids at the end. So, there are two extremes at the moment. Extreme 1 drops the right side gear, also known as rings, necklaces, etc. the fight drops 4 items, and you will also get a totem that you can exchange for gear if your RNG is really bad. Extreme 2 drops your weapons, and it drops 1 role-specific weapon and 1 weapon coffer, which has a weapon for whatever role opens it. You also get a totem as well. If you are in a static, it will take at most 8 runs to get your weapon. If you are using the party finder and are really unlucky, it will take at most 10 runs, because that's how many totems it takes to trade for the weapon. Extreme Trials can also be run as much as you want, so you can farm them until your heart's content. Now, the way raiding works, such as Pandemonium, is that all the raid encounters drop what the game calls relics, which have no role restriction on them, and you have to collect a specific amount of these relics in order to trade for the piece of gear that you want. The great thing about Final Fantasy XIV raids is that you only get locked out of loot from an encounter after you have already won a piece of loot, so you can keep killing the boss over and over again until you get your desired relic. Then, you go to the Relic Exchange NPC, trade in the required amount of relics, and get your piece of gear. It can take a while, obviously, to fill out all of your gear, but you have complete control over what you get and when you get it, which is really nice. I dig player agency. That is so different from World of Warcraft, where after you kill a boss, the gear is locked out, regardless of if you got something, which increases the amount of time it takes to get gear, and also leads to frustration when something you want doesn't drop, after weeks of trying. Final Fantasy XIV gives you more agency, and respects your time. You get to decide how you want to gear up your character, and that is something World of Warcraft has been lacking. Because of all of the RNG in World of Warcraft, it's hard to gear your character up the way that you want to. It feels really bad when the RNG weekly loot chest gives you stuff you don't need anymore, because you got it in the raid this week, or worse yet, nothing of value. That is really the worst. I just wanted to say something here in closing. I don't think gear taking a long time to obtain is inherently a bad thing. The problem I have with it in World of Warcraft, and most modern MMOs, to be fair, is that gear is so replaceable that spending a bunch of time to get it, well, it seems utterly pointless and a complete waste of your time. You know that gear is replaced frequently, so spending a bunch of time to get it just feels kind of hollow. I remembered when I played Final Fantasy XI, gear in that game took a very long time to obtain. Sometimes you could go over a year without the piece of gear you want dropping. The big difference was that Final Fantasy XI was far more horizontal with its gear progression, which basically meant that those pieces of gear were always relevant. You didn't feel like you wasted your time getting the gear because the game didn't replace it all the next raid. Anyways, that's how these two behemoth of games handle raid progression. I think it's pretty obvious which one I prefer, but what are your thoughts? If you haven't raided in Final Fantasy XIV yet, does hearing this make you want to do so? And that's all I have for today. I hope you all have a very happy holiday. Thank you so much for watching. Please consider liking, commenting, and subscribing. And until next time, well, take care.